Did the Falcons make the right choice choosing Kirk Cousins over the top quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL Draft?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka the iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. aka. And I've been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. But I appreciate and want to give a special shout out to the everydayers out there that make this illustrious podcast their first listen or first watch of the day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we will be joined by Bleacher Report's Derrik Klassen to talk all about the upcoming 2024 quarterback class and sort of whether or not the Falcons made the right choice by going with Kirk Cousins. Let's start that conversation with Derrik Klassen right now. Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, where I am joined by an illustrious guest. He is Derrik Klassen, who covers the draft for Bleacher Report, reception, perception, quarterback charting, all that and more. He's been all over the place, like pretty much any football writing website in the last 5-6 years you probably worked for at some point in time. Is that fair to say, Derrik?
Yeah, probably at some point. I did 3013 this year, New York Times the year before that, Football Outsiders obviously before that blew up. So yeah, I mean you're kind of right. If it's put out some football content, I've probably been either there or around it.
There you go. Well, Derrik, of course, talks quarterbacks all the time, QB class on Twitter. And so we're going to talk quarterbacks on today's Locked On Falcons, talk about some of the upcoming prospects in this year's draft and, sort of compare them in terms of the quarterbacks that the Falcons have, right? And that's where I want to start the conversation, Derrik, right? The Falcons basically made a choice at the beginning of this offseason to basically go all in, maybe not the right term, but to put a bunch of chips into the middle of the table, maybe not all their chips into the Kirk Cousins basket, rather than sort of trying to figure it out with one of these rookies at the top of the class, sitting at the 8th overall pick. Would they have to trade up to get one of these guys? Would one of those guys fall to them? And I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you think of that choice? Do you think that was the right call for the Falcons given where they were at? Or do you think, trying to get one of these top rookies at the top of the draft class would have been a better choice?
I think it was perfectly fine to go for Kirk Cousins. I kind of liked it because, you look at basically team construction, there's going to be nuance, but you can either kind of pay the quarterback a lot of money and then just invest draft picks everywhere else and pray that a lot of the young guys there work out, or you can do the inverse where you're paying a bunch of dudes, at offensive line or receiver or whatever, and then you're just hoping that you can develop a rookie quarterback within that 3-4 year window. So I think because the Falcons obviously had invested a lot in their skill positions in the top 10 in the draft, and then have done also a pretty good investment in the offensive line, I think it made a lot of sense to just try to get the best quarterback that they could get right now. Especially for me, they're not going to get Caleb Williams, obviously, and they're probably not going to get whoever the second quarterback off of the board is. They would have, at the very, very best, in the most ideal world, been getting whoever the third quarterback off the board is. And so I think it probably makes more sense to just go get Kirk, who he is what he is, but you're going to get top half of the league quarterback play, if not something closer to top 10 when he's really, really playing at his best. So I think with all the weapons that they have, I think with the offense that they're bringing in here, I think it just made a lot of sense to go get a guy can run the offense and get the ball to a handful of extremely talented skill players who I think now that they're going to have a player like Kirk Cousins, I think we're going to see the best of Drake London and Bijan and hopefully, if he's healthy, Kyle Pitts as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And that's a point I've brought up before where you talk about paying all the other players and trying to develop a rookie quarterback. The Falcons tried that with Desmond Ridder last year. It didn't quite work out, and it kind of led to the coach getting fired. And it would have been weird for Raheem Morris to come in and say, "Yeah, let's do that again," right? I don't know if the owner Arthur Blank would have been as willing to buy in on that selling point. And maybe he would have went with Bill Belichick if that was the case going into this process. But yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. But that being said, I do want to talk with you about those top quarterbacks that the Falcons may be missing out on this year's draft class, and we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So every day, guys, I check the leaderboards to see who's on top. And no, I'm not talking about the NFL draft. I'm talking about Monopoly Go, the mobile game that has been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on classic Monopoly that you can play anywhere, anytime, explore hundreds of Monopoly boards, all while raking in that huge fortune, right? You can charge rent to your friends on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, or you can go after your friends' Monopoly money by pulling off bank heists and taking wrecking balls to their landmarks. But my favorite part is the leaderboards, because that's where you can see who's a real Monopoly tycoon and who's about to go bankrupt. So go climb the chart yourself by downloading Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Again, download Monopoly Go for free on the App Store or Google Play. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I do want to plug the Locked On NFL mock draft, where it's dropping Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time on April 17th. 6-episode series giving you all the local insight, including my own, on one version of the first round of the NFL draft. So check it out on Locked On Sports, today's 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. So, Derrik, let's talk about the top of this quarterback class. And, because everybody loves quarterback rankings, do you have a top 5 sort of as we sit here, basically a week away from the draft?
I do. So I am very much in the minority in having Drake Maye as like QB1A, and then Caleb QB1B. I think a lot of people, when I say this, take this as me being somehow lower on Caleb. I don't think that that's the truth at all. I think Caleb is every bit as good as everybody else seems to think that he is. It's just that I also think Drake Maye happens to be like one of like a quarterback you take first overall, and you just don't even think about it. So those two to me are kind of in a tier of their own as like just surefire, take them first overall, don't even think about it. Then you get into the next tier, which is Jayden Daniels and JJ McCarthy, who truthfully, like, I've had Jayden quarterback 3 most of the process, but I have like mentally thought about flip-flopping them a little bit. But to me, those are more guys who are closer to like back end of the first round, like top of the second round players, where I think there is a path to success and they can be quality starters. But for me, it's a little bit harder to see like truly like top 8 fighting for all pro type of quarterback talent with those two. Or at least it would take like a lot of things to really, really go right for them to get there. And I think especially if you're picking top 5 in the draft, it's going to be hard to have a team that is ready made for them to do that. And then after that, I've gone back and forth between Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler, and it's kind of just, do you want the guy who can be competent? Like, I think Bo Nix is probably in the Gardner Minshew to Andy Dalton spectrum, which is not very exciting, but that's a functional NFL player, right? That's a player who's going to stick around for a long time and start, 80 games over his career or whatever, just, bumping around with a few teams. And then Spencer Rattler is kind of like the home run swing on, like, there's a 7% chance he's amazing and a 93% chance he just completely flames out of the league instantly. But I think the arm talent there is insane, and he's really, really tough in the pocket. And I think by all accounts, he seems to have gotten much better like reviews as a teammate, as a leader and stuff at South Carolina than he did at, Oklahoma. Obviously, that's kind of the big talking point with him, but that's kind of my general quarterbacking tiers right now.
Fair enough. I kind of see them in a similar light, but talk a little bit about Drake Maye and why you think he has the talent, to be on par with a Caleb Williams, and maybe some of the reasons why there seems to be a bigger disconnect with him, with some people sort of seeing him, not as the sort of clear-cut QB2, but QB3, QB4, and some people even think like QB5 in this draft class.
Yeah, so I've said a lot with Drake. Like, if you look at all of the best quarterbacks in the league, they're all like 6'2 plus, 220 plus, insanely good athletes for the position and have really, really good arms, like S tier arm talent when you think about, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. Matthew Stafford isn't that caliber of athlete, but he has the other stuff. Justin Herbert obviously has all the athleticism and arm talent. Like, that is the type of player and archetype that you have to if you want to fight fire with fire at the top. And Drake Maye, I think, checks all of those boxes. I think he measured in like 6'4", 226. He's obviously a really good athlete on tape. Just big, strong, fast, very balanced, which I think is important in terms of like, fighting off sacks and all that sort of stuff. And then the arm talent with him is just crazy. Like, obviously Caleb's is a little bit better. There's a little bit more elasticity, I think, to Caleb's arm that kind of puts him a little bit over the top. But Drake Maye can just throw it through a brick wall if you need him to, and I think he can make every throw on the field. And so that's not really a concern with me. I think he's just unbelievably talented. So that's where it all starts with me. And then the other thing for me is I really, really love quarterbacks who can manage the pocket well and can like understand what is going to happen to them in terms of how blitzes are happening, where they're coming from, where they're supposed to be hot, having all of those answers, and then being able to throw from cluttered platforms. Because in the NFL, you're going to have to do it a lot. And some of these college guys just like didn't really have to do it. Like when you look at a Michael Penix, Bo Nix, like these guys just didn't have to throw from cluttered areas all that much. Drake Maye at North Carolina, he had to do it probably 10 times a game, and I think he acquitted himself quite well in that regard. So I think just like those couple of things alone really, really set him at the top for me. And then he also has a little bit of that, like, I'm going to go win the game mentality, like Josh Allen, where he's like, it might look stupid every now and then, but he's going to go make a play to win the game. And I think when you look at, again, a lot of the best quarterbacks, you look at, the Justin Herberts, Matthew Staffords, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, these are guys who are willing to make insane throws and insane plays, especially on the move. And I think Drake Maye absolutely has that. So that is all of why I think he's incredible. To your question about why is he maybe not the consensus like top 2 quarterback along with Caleb, I think people just, one, he does have like 2 or 3 misses a game that are just like, what are we doing here, bud? Like, come on, like you got to be better than that. I mean, and Matthew Stafford does this too, right? Like you'll see Matthew Stafford just throw a speed out 5 yards over someone's head twice a game, and you're like, well, that's just bizarre. And Drake Maye has a little bit of that to him for sure. And I think the footwork people get really weird about. To me, it's just he's playing in this air raid BS offense behind a really bad offensive line where like I just don't think there is structure in terms of the footwork, like what they're teaching him. Like I just don't think that exists. Whereas like you look at LSU with Jayden Daniels, that is much more of a closer to a pro style like timing and the way that the concepts work. And so it kind of tracks that Jayden looks a little bit cleaner in that sense. He's also started for 5 seasons, whereas Drake has only started 2. So I think people just see the footwork and for some reason think that that's not something that he can fix. But to me, it's like, I don't know, man. He's a 21-year-old who's playing behind a terrible offensive line. I think he'll probably be fine if you can just get him into some real NFL coaching. So I think people are just kind of hung up on the wrong stuff with him as to why he's like not the consensus top 2 quarterback.
Yeah, I recently came to the conclusion that I also think part of it is it kind of depends on which games you watched first with Drake Maye. Kind of like I think if you watch like the Clemson and NC State game at the end of the season first, like you probably had a more negative first impression of him, as opposed if you watched any of the earlier games, you probably wouldn't like, oh, this guy's really good, and you're more willing to excuse the bad play down the stretch versus if it was flipped. In that regard. But moving off of Drake Maye for a second, let's talk a little bit more about Jayden Daniels and JJ McCarthy and some of the reasons why you might see them as maybe a tier lower than the top 2 quarterbacks. But what are some of the selling points as well, the pros and the cons with both of those guys potentially having success at the next level?
Yeah, I'll start with Jayden Daniels. As for the good, obviously the athleticism is crazy with him. He's going to walk into the league and be a top probably 5 runner at the position. Like he's very, I think, Kyler Murray-esque in the sense of like what he's going to be able to do as a runner. Accuracy wise, he is phenomenal. Like I think, when I get to the negatives, I'll say that there are some throws he doesn't like to make, But on the throws that he does make, he is exceptionally accurate to basically every level of the field. He can take off heat when he needs to. Like, he does a really good job making some of those layered throws, especially outside the numbers, like some of the corner routes in LSU's offense and stuff like that. I thought he just did, like, his placement is really just phenomenal. And like, there are flashes of him, understanding where a safety is pinning down on a certain concept, and he'll throw away from their leverage and give his receiver a shot to go get a ball that might be really difficult to have gotten otherwise. So I think he does some good stuff there. I think the way that he plays with timing and rhythm within the offense, to me, is very mature. I think he does a really good job at that. Obviously, he's played, again, for 5 seasons, so like, he better have this, but he does have it. So it's like, it is a little arrow in his quiver. I think that's something that's really good for him. So to me, he actually is, I think people look at him as a high ceiling prospect because of some of the athleticism. I think he's a high floor guy because obviously, he's going to give you something as a runner. I think he plays within the timing and rhythm of the offense quite well, and he's accurate. That, to me, a lot of is why he actually reminds me of, people will say Lamar Jackson or RG3. I don't see that at all. I think he's more like Tyrod Taylor, who Tyrod was a really good, like, just rhythm player, was really, really good at, he could scramble every now and then, didn't really make mistakes, didn't put the ball in harm's way, really good deep thrower the way that Jayden is. That's more the player that he reminds me of. And on the negative end, this is also why he reminds me of Tyrod. Doesn't throw the middle of the field with that much anticipation or aggression. Like I said, when he does make those throws, they're accurate. It's not something he does consistently, not the way that you see from a lot of the top 10 NFL quarterbacks right now. And then in the pocket, his pocket management he's just not really a guy who's willing to, stand in the pocket, firm base, slide around, keep his eyes up. He's more a guy like, he'll go 1-2, and if he feels something is wrong, he's just out of the pocket. And when he's out of the pocket, he's looking to run. He's not looking to throw. Like, I forget what the number is exactly, but he has like the lowest rate of scrambles that turn into pass attempts. Like, he is just, when he's out of the pocket, he's looking to run. It's very Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts-esque. Whereas I think when you look at a lot of the top 10 quarterbacks, you look at a guy like Lamar Jackson, he's thought of as a runner. But when Lamar's out of the pocket, he's looking to throw. Like, his eyes are downfield. He's trying to make a really impressive throw. I just don't quite see that from Daniels. So I think he's a good prospect. I just get scared when we talk about taking him in the top 5.
Fair enough. And with JJ McCarthy, where are sort of his pros and cons?
Yeah, so McCarthy is, he's almost like a complete opposite prospect of Jayden Daniels in a lot of ways. JJ McCarthy, I think his best traits are actually that I think he is pretty tough in the pocket. And I think he is a guy who is willing to slide around a little bit. He's willing to, if he knows he's hot and he just has to make a throw, but a free runner is going to hit him, he doesn't care. He'll step up into it and make that throw. There's one specifically against Iowa where he just knew he was going to get his clock cleaned, didn't care, and he made the throw. I was like, okay, you're going to have to do that in the NFL. So that's I think really good with him. I think in terms of velocity, he can really throw the ball really hard. He can throw it pretty far. I have some concerns about how much touch he can add to throws. I think he struggles taking heat off, which I think he's going to have to learn in the NFL. But I guess it's better to start with a strong arm than, and work your way down and learn how to use it, as opposed to just having a Mac Jones arm and not ever being able to get velocity at any point. So I think that's another notch in his favor. I think he's actually a pretty good athlete. He's not quite to the level of really the other 3 top quarterbacks in this class, but I think he is fairly explosive. And I think when he gets to stride out a little bit, he's going to be a guy who, again, he's not going to run for 700 yards or anything in a year, but he can get you 300 and keep some plays alive and be interesting. And so I think that's another notch for him. The other thing is, too, I think he is a pretty creative player. Like, when he is outside of the pocket, again, because Michigan threw 24 times a game and half of them were like under center play action shots, you don't get to see this that much from JJ. But in the instances where he had to go outside the pocket, I do think he had some pretty cool moments, and that was good for him. Where I think he's going to have issues is, one, I think his footwork, especially when he's throwing to the left, Nate Tice has brought this up a lot. He's the guy who, like, when he's turning left and throwing, he like way overstrides and opens up his entire body, and he just ends up like swiveling all the way around. If you remember Mitch Trubisky, he did this all the time. It's why he can't throw left. Like, that's where the joke came from. It's because he did the same thing. So JJ is definitely going to have to clean that up. Thankfully, he's very young, so I don't think he's completely doomed in that regard, which is good. Like I said, I think his touch accuracy is really just not good. I think when you saw him having to throw like some corner routes, it was really not great. If he's got like trail man coverage trying to throw an over route, he just really struggled to get it up and down over players. A lot of his deep balls were really like he's throwing them on a line, which is not really how you want to throw a deep ball. So I think he's going to struggle a little bit in that sense. And then I think as a decision maker, he's going to have to grow a little bit because he was really a guy who I think, especially post snap, would just make some bizarre decisions and really put the ball in danger. Again, because of how squeaky clean the environment was at Michigan, you didn't see him in those situations a lot. But I think that there were a couple too many instances where he would just not see his own defender, not understand where moving pieces are post snap. Again, he's a very young player, so he could learn that. But I think it's going to take him some time. So I think JJ McCarthy is like a very long-term view quarterback prospect. Like I think it's probably going to be 3 years before we see him starting to play his best ball. But I can see the bones of a good quarterback. Just like I said, I think it's going to maybe take a while to get there.
There you go. So, the Falcons don't seem like they're going to get any of these top 4 guys. And if guys are curious on Caleb Williams, go check out Locked On Bears. I'm sure they're talking about Caleb Williams a bunch. That's a pipe dream here in Atlanta. But we'll talk about some quarterbacks that, may be realistic options for the Falcons, especially on day 2 and day 3 that Derrik may like. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, most of my life, I've been living paycheck to paycheck, but thankfully, Locked On has been very good for me these last few years, and I can now start saving money and thinking long-term about my financial future because I don't want to go back to that lifestyle. And Yahoo Finance, our proud sponsor today, is giving me the tools that are going to help me grow my savings into so much more. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're like me and you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance is giving you the tools and the data that you need all in one place. They are the #1 finance destination to stay on top of the financial news cycle, including breaking news and analysis, editorials, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That's the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, please hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers between now and the draft. But Derrik, let's talk about some day 2 and day 3 options. The Falcons have been vocal about their desire to add a third quarterback into the mix, whether that's, a second round pick, a 7th round pick, or an undrafted free agent. We'll have to sort of see a week from today. But is there sort of a guy or two that you could see the Falcons drafting, to be sort of that guy that you can sort of stash as your third string guy behind Kirk Cousins and Taylor Heinicke for a year, that you could see maybe being part of a development plan as an heir apparent to Kirk Cousins in the future? Is there, a couple of guys there that you like potentially in that role here in Atlanta?
Yeah, so I think in this range, it's pretty much for everybody going to be Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and Spencer Rattler. Of that group, I think Rattler actually makes the most sense for how they want to run the offense, because I think it's going to be a Rams-esque type of offense where you got to throw the middle of the field a lot, got to hang into the pocket. And I think Rattler acquits himself quite well in those areas. I think that's kind of where he wins. In my charting, his best area was 11 to 20 yards over the middle. That's where the offense works. Like that's kind of what they want to do. And then, like I said, I think he's very tough in the pocket. Like I've said on other shows, my ideal spot for Rattler is with the Rams, where he can just sit for a year or two behind Matthew Stafford and kind of learn the offense that way. So I think kind of putting him into this Falcons situation where it's kind of similar-ish in terms of what they're going to want to do with the offense and the timeline in terms of, again, having a couple years behind a guy like Kirk. I think that is probably their best bet. Bo Nix, I mean, like I said, if they want a guy who they are less sure has a great ceiling, but could at least be functional, he's a guy who I think could make some sense, but I'm less excited about him for their offense than I would be, like I said, Rattler. And then Michael Penix, I just kind of generally struggle with Michael Penix as a prospect. And then again, I think if this offense is going to function a lot with having to throw over the middle of the field and making tough throws from like kind of cluttered pockets like late in the down, that to me is just not really how Michael Penix wins either. So again, like I said, out of these three who seem to be the guys, that I think Rattler is probably where I would go. And then as far as day three guys, I really just don't think there are that many day three quarterbacks in this class. Like you start dipping into like the Joe Miltons, the Sam Hartmans, the Jordan Travises. I'm not that excited about any of those guys really. So it's kind of, at least for the Falcons, I think Rattler is the guy they need to be looking at for sure.
Okay. Well, when it comes to those day three guys, probably not somebody that probably has a future as a starter. But whether it's Joe Milton or Michael Pratt, is there anybody that you say, okay, well, in the Falcons offense, or at least the vision of the Falcons offense that we're talking about, that guy could be a high caliber backup maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I can see it with Pratt because he is a guy who's very willing to hang in the pocket and make difficult, aggressive throws down the field. I waver a little bit on his arm talent. I think he's a quarterback who like out throws what his arm is capable of. You know, like, or he tries to bite off more than he can chew with in terms of his arm talent. Like he is a very aggressive thrower, and in college at Tulane, he was able to get away with it at times, but I think in the NFL, it's going to take a couple of years for him to learn what he can actually get away with. But I do think the pocket toughness that he has and some of the athleticism, I think is probably going to be fairly useful. He's probably their best bet on day three. In terms of the other guys, I have a hard time really seeing it with any of those guys. Like Joe Milton to me is, I mean, he's more of an idea than anything. Like he was barely playing quarterback at Tennessee. Like that's just really not a real offense over there. Sam Hartman, I actually do think he's pretty tough in the pocket, but again, his arm is just not very talented. So I think it's going to be tough there. Jordan Travis kind of in the same boat. I just don't think he's all that accurate, or his arm is very talented. So if they do want a guy who can't really make the top end throws in the offense and just get a guy who can be tough in the pocket, yeah, Pratt is probably their best bet, and then maybe a guy like Sam Hartman, but it's slim pickings once you get past like the top 7 or 8 quarterbacks in this class.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's kind of the conclusion I've come to. It's like, once you get past like the top 4 guys, I can see a vision of all 4 of those guys being good in the NFL. And then after that point, it's like, yeah, I can see a path for Nix or Penix or Rattler, but it's a much slimmer path. And then after that point, it's just like you're just throwing darts at the board,
Yep.
and maybe you get lucky, and one of those guys turns into like a Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy type of dude that you put him in the right offense, and they can cook with the right pieces around them. But that is absolutely a dart throw. But Derrik, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking about some of these quarterbacks. We'll see what the Falcons wind up doing. But let the people know where they can get some of your other quarterback content if they're interested in it.
Yeah, you guys can find me at QB Class on Twitter. You can also find me at Bleacher Report. We are putting together our final big board on Thursday, and then I think it'll come out that Monday, so the 20th or 21st, whatever it is, for Monday of draft week. So that's really exciting. We're going to have everything finished up there. And then reception perception, you can go check out all of the quarterback charting profiles I've done. I think we have 7 on the site now, and then Michael Pratt will be coming shortly. So you guys can go check all that out. And then thank you, Aaron, for having me on. This was a blast.
No, man, we chopped it up at the Senior Bowl. We were talking about, why is Drake Maye getting all the slander back then? And it was an interesting conversation that we had back then. But Derrik, always appreciate talking quarterbacks with you. Look forward to future conversations about the quarterbacks. I'm sure we'll be talking quarterbacks next year for the Atlanta Falcons. Finding that sort of guy that could be the heir apparent, because you just kind of got to take swings at this point in time when it comes to the quarterback, because whether you have the number 1 pick or the last pick in the draft, the chances of you hitting on that guy are pretty low. So this will continue to be a conversation, and I look forward to having those conversations in the future with you. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here. Thanks to Derrik Klassen. Tomorrow, your first listen, you will be joined by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. We'll probably get into some of the Bill Belichick stuff, as well as, where Jarvis is at with this Falcons upcoming draft. And that's all in store for you on tomorrow's episode. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today's 24/7 streaming channel to get that Locked On mock draft live on April 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.